Welcome to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann, the podcast where entrepreneurs, business leaders, and HR professionals share tips, strategies, and trends in their area of expertise. They also talk about their successes and struggles along their career and business journey. If you love to learn through storytelling and find people fascinating, join us. Welcome to another episode of Rev Up Your Potential. My guest today is John Wang. Let me tell you about him. John Wang is a well-known Asian American communications and mindset speaker. You're in for a treat. He and I have had a conversation earlier to this podcast, and I just love what he has to share with us. He has 15 years of experience coaching quiet overachievers to be seen for their brilliance. He is the founder of Big Asian Experience. And if you can't hear me, you can see, for those of you who see it, you can see it in big letters, Big Asian Energy. And he's just pointed it out for those who are listening. And over 26 million people have seen his videos on overcoming our patterns of self-sabotage. We're in for a treat and a lively discussion. Thank you, John, for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I so appreciate this, and I'm excited to chat.
I'm excited to chat as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about your business and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I started in the corporate world about 15 years ago and working as a translator for a market research company, big companies like MasterCard, Volvo, and everything like that. And that's where it is that I realized there was this interesting cultural difference between Asian North Americans and everyone else. And this is what I call there's a kind of invisible uniqueness to the experience. So, over the years, I became a educator. I started a school called Mastery Academy, at first working with, overachieving Asian students, helping them to college, that kind of stuff. And then over time, many of them started coming back to me. So these days I started coaching them. And these days I started a coaching and speaking business. And I've got a book coming out soon called Big Asian Energy, talking about how to be able to find and be seen for our unique brilliance.
Share a little bit more about that Big Asian Energy then.
Sure, because you're definitely right. It's always it's a brand name that I feel like people kind of pause at, and either they'll kind of crack up for a moment.
Big Asian Energy.
Like Big Asian Energy. But what's so interesting is how many Asian people I spoke to who said, oftentimes we're seen as the quiet, shy ones, as a cultural identity. And this is something that we keep getting told. And because a lot of the people I coach, they're, in the corporate spaces, or they're, working with companies like Google or Meta, or, these kind of major companies, they often feel like they are not being recognized. And they'll come to me, they're like, I don't understand why. I just came back from a meeting, and, my boss told me that, they just don't sense that I have this gravitas, or they're like, they don't see what it is that I'm contributing. And there's a point of frustration because so much of this, of course, comes down to our communication. A recent study conducted, I believe, by AAIM found that over 60-something% of Asian employees felt that their company saw them as being good employees, good workers, hardworking, were willing to eat bitter, in my Taiwanese dad will say, right? We're willing to eat bitter and work hard, but we're not great at self-promotion. So as a result of the main message behind Big Asian Energy is be seen, be heard, step up. We are here to claim our seat at the table. And that not only is this not something that's arrogant, but it's actually the best thing you can do for your community.
That's so cool. And I know that you talk about some tips and strategies based on your Big Asian Energy, and you call it ACE. Can you tell us a little bit more about what ACE is?
Yeah, absolutely. So ACE is a framework that I created that combines a number of different study modalities. There was a Harvard business review study that was done where they discovered that when we meet people, the two things that we usually are actually reading for is competence, is this person capable and able to produce work and social status, and then the second thing we're looking for is warmth. And what they found was that Asian Americans in particular were ranked as being high on competence but low on warmth. That's actually a factor in their study, was that they found that many people viewed Asians as being almost a little distant. And I found that to be bizarre, kind of like the way I find the stereotype of shy Asians as being really bizarre. Like if you spend 5 minutes with my mom in a marketplace, you know she's not shy. If you ever go to a dim sum restaurant, you know Asians are not shy. We are loud, we are communicative, we are out there. We're exuberant, enthusiastic people. What are
And
they
if
talking
there's
about?
only 3 more haggaos on the tray, those people will get up and walk over there and grab them,
Oh
even though
yeah.
you're the next table.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's like, if you ever go to these kind of celebrations, and I'm talking to my friends who are from India, who are from, like Korea, who are from Indonesia, we are not about shy and quiet. So where did we get this idea? And I found that really the core message is really there's three things. So I interviewed and looked at, I've worked with at this point hundreds of clients and overachievers, CEOs, entrepreneurs. And I started sitting down, I started looking at what is it that makes the successful ones tick? What are the difference? What was that point of differentiation that allowed them to get ahead, whereas others didn't? And I realized the secret really came down to these only three traits. That's it, only three traits.
Mhm.
And if you're able to communicate these three traits on a consistent basis, people will see you as not only a leader of someone they look up to and admire, they'll give you more trust in your influence. And those three traits are assertiveness, competence, and empathy. Assertiveness is our ability to set boundaries and communicate leadership. And this is what it is I want to say. And without it, we have this idea that oftentimes I think that assertiveness means that we'll be seen as arrogant or dominating. But the truth is, assertiveness can be done in both a loud way or a quiet way. There's a quiet assertiveness we can create. And
And
then
there's a
there's,
difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness.
oh,
And
huge.
and people think they're assertive, but they're actually aggressive. Or they think to be assertive, they have to be aggressive. And you
Absolutely.
can be assertive in quiet ways, by
Hmm.
stating it in a very confident, emphatic tone that can still
Hmm.
be respectful. It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be. When it borders on aggressive, that is beyond. So I wanted to make sure people realize that assertive is different from aggressive. Aggressive is a negative
Yeah.
level above that.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's what we call the shadow side, right? And that's
The
exactly what it is.
dark
There's
side.
assertive. It is, right?
Yeah,
Like it is,
yeah,
right? Aggression is the idea that I'm here to overpower other people. But
yeah.
assertive can be quiet. I like to say that Asian confidence hits different. We always associate confidence, especially in the West, from this very cowboy view, right? This guy who like comes on and is louder than everyone and takes up more space than everyone else. But the truth is, there is this energy where you could see, we all know this person who's sitting in the back of the room, who's quiet throughout the meeting, but says something that is so memorable and so powerful that it just shuts everyone down. Like for a moment, everyone just sits and they almost have to breathe that in. And that could also be quiet assertiveness. And there's
Mhm.
something still very powerful about that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
then, and then we have competence. Competence is our ability to self-advocate. There's a kind of negative connotation to self-promotion. And I'm like, it's not self-promotion if it's self-advocacy. You're advocating for yourself. You're not promoting yourself because you're being seen for your true worth. And then the final thing is empathy, which is our warmth, which is our ability to communicate from a place of understanding, connection. And when we have these 3 points all simultaneously running, we get that big Asian energy.
Yeah. It's interesting how you say that w- Asians are perceived as not having the empathy. Where do you think that observation comes from?
I think that a lot of Asian Americans, we have had to protect ourselves especially in an environment where we are the minorities, to do two things. I think there's an external and there's an internal. I think the external is that because we're oftentimes, placed with all sorts of these expectations, we learn to just protect ourselves by not being too outspoken in how we feel, because otherwise there's a lack of safety around it. If we say something that, somebody doesn't agree with, people oftentimes go on the attack against us. So as a result, we've learned to kind of reserve that a little bit. I think that another part of it, however, is that we have a cultural lesson of being kind of showing only our perfected side, especially in a workplace environment, right? Like, we're very polished as a people. And that's not a bad thing. That's an amazing thing. It just means we're more professional, right? But as a result, sometimes people read that as being that we're not sharing our vulnerabilities, or we're only sharing this one side. And that polishedness becomes and feels a little bit distanced.
Okay. Okay. And I think it's sometimes people not getting to know each other. When you start to get to know each other, those that barrier, that psychological
Mhm.
safety breaks down, and you find true connection with people, a building of trust, a building of relationships. And when people
Absolutely.
don't know each other, they don't necessarily build that relationship. So
Mhm.
then you don't look like you have empathy because you don't know each other well enough to do that.
Yes, and also safety in that regard is such a different experience when you are coming from and it doesn't mean you have to be an immigrant, but if you look different, there is a concept called the perpetual foreigner syndrome. And this sociological study has kind of shown that there's this Asian Americans are seen as the others, or Asian Canadians and Asian Americans.
I know,
We talked
just
about
for
this.
clarity, that word American means North American, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. The proper term is Asian diaspora, which means Asians who have spread around the world and now live outside of Asia. But a lot of people don't know that term. So I just use Asian Americans as a shorthand to say Asian North Americans, but it's just Asians in the West. It's Asians in the world, right? There's a different identity. We occupy a third culture identity. There is a different element. Like, when I go, quote unquote, back to Taiwan, I'm like, I'm not really from here.
It was so strange. I'm Canadian born,
Yeah.
lived in Toronto most of my life, Calgary for 4 years of my life. And my community, when I was growing up, were all from southern China and Canton
Mhm,
area, and the
mhm,
villages surrounding that. And most of the people looked like me. And when
mhm.
I went to China, there are tall ones and short ones,
Yeah.
and people who dye their hair, because most of us never had any other color hair than the black that we were born with. Uh,
Yeah.
but you know, in China, people were evolving, and they were more, they were less traditional than our
Uh-huh.
parents, who came over at whatever century year
Yeah.
they came, and
Yeah.
kept those cultures. They didn't
Yeah.
grow with the culture of the times, both in North America and in their native land. So
Mhm,
when we went there, I always thought, oh, well, if I go there, I'll feel like I belong, but I didn't, because
mhm.
I didn't speak Mandarin. I spoke more Cantonese, and I didn't dress like people in mainland China. And so they'd look at me when I'm talking English to my daughter, say, "Hey, do you want the
Mhm.
kiwi juice or the mango?"
Yeah.
And they said, "Why are you speaking English?" And I said, "Well, because we're from Canada." And so
Right.
I thought, okay, I don't belong here. I don't belong there. Like, I'm
Mhm.
just an anomaly.
Yeah. I could so relate to that. And I think so many other, people who are Asian heritage, but now live all around the world, probably can too. And the sociological term for us is third culture. We are from one culture in our lineage and ancestry, and we now occupy a second culture, but we are actually the bridge that bridges between both.
I find people so fascinating because we learn from them. And as you know, Michelle Yeoh
Hmm.
received the Academy Award, and she, some of the stories that were coming out, she said, when I moved to Los Angeles, they said, "So what's it feel like to be a minority?" And she said, minority? What minority? Because she grew up
Yeah.
in, I forget exactly where she's from. Malaysia, is she? But she grew up there, and so she was a majority. And
Yeah.
suddenly she's still a majority when you think about the whole world,
Yeah.
how many
Global majority.
Asians there
Yeah.
are. So she doesn't understand why they're calling her a minority. And I thought, well, I know why we're being called a minority, because
Yeah.
we were a minority decades ago. So
Absolutely.
it was seeing through her eyes what others do see. It opens my eyes as well, right?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we are unique. We are a unique experience
And
as
yet
third
this is a
cultures.
great
Mhm.
time because the world is so much more global.
Yeah.
Many people now travel around the world, and they understand culture, and they enjoy foods from various parts of the world. So it
Mhm.
is a better time for much more acceptance in diversity and inclusivity. Yet we still have a long way to go, for sure. For sure.
Absolutely. I believe a study that came out very recently, which was done post-pandemic, ex- shared that I think it was 3 out of 4 Chinese Americans have experienced some kind of racial discrimination. It's at this point, it's something that we don't really think about. We think that, oh, we should, as a society, have kind of evolved beyond that, but it's still something that is constantly still very relevant now. And I think even more so after the pandemic.
Yeah. And yeah, particularly with the pandemic, a lot of hate was shown, Asian hate, particularly in the United States.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the very basis behind that is that idea of the perpetual foreigner syndrome. It's the cliche of somebody going up to someone who looks Asian and asks the question and says, "Hey, where are you from?" And when you say Toronto, I'm Canada, which is, I say Vancouver. I'm not Canadian. Like, I'm more Canadian than anything else. I'm like, that's how I feel. Or, during the pandemic, I've had people, unfortunately, ignorant people who came up to me and just told me, go back to my country. And I had to say, this is my country. I'm a Canadian citizen. This is my home.
Yeah. And myself, I'm third generation living in Canada. So it's
Mhm.
like when you tell
You
people
are,
just by visual that they need to go somewhere, it's very like it's just
yeah.
it's just coming from a place of lack of understanding and knowledge and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah,
Which
and I wish that at this point we could say that we are over it, but it's still a I don't want to use the word battle, but it's still a transformation that we're still in the process of.
it's interesting when we talk about diversity, inclusivity in workplaces. We talk about different ethnicities learning to speak up, or learning to get comfortable and psychologically safe to feel they have a voice in their workplace, and that allies who are not of those minorities can have a role to play in supporting and fostering and nurturing and listening to this kind of stuff. We
Mhm.
talked a little bit before we came on about growing up
Mhm.
um, as a visible minority,
Sure.
and you were kind of hinting at, and I said, let's have this discussion when we go onto the podcast about growing up. And there are two different ways to view how you want to grow up, and I want you to kind of share that conversation, and I'll share my perspectives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked so many different things. Can you give me a little bit
Okay,
more context of which
so
one?
so you said you can either choose to be seen as we use that term banana, yellow on the
Oh,
outside,
yeah,
white on the
yeah,
inside,
that's right. Yeah,
or what is in
yeah.
slang, and please just hear us, because we are of Asian ethnicity,
Sure.
FOBs, which is called fresh off the boat. And you
Yeah.
talked about, I was leaning one way or the other, and then I kind of veered. So can you share that bit of
Yeah.
your identity journey growing up?
Absolutely, yeah. So when I first immigrated, I immigrated here when I was to Canada when I was about 6, 7 years old. And at the time, I was one of 2 non-white kids in my school in that grade. So as a result, I was very clearly and identified as, okay, I am the outsider. And when you're the outsider as an immigrant, belonging is huge. You would do it whatever it takes to belong, including to the point where, I would hide any elements of me that is not part of what it meant to be Canadian. And as a result, I really embraced being seen as a Westerner, being seen in my Canadian identity as who I am. I was very conscious of not speaking with an accent. I was very conscious about the food that I ate, the way that I dressed, the music that I listened to, and the way that I would hang out with my friends, which is, staying with them and playing sports or doing sleepovers, which is not a thing in my family, right? Especially not with that kind of traditional Asian parenting style. So I really much embraced the ABC or the CBC, the Canadian-born Chinese identity. And then later on, I saw that there was a mass influx of more Asian Canadian immigrants. And oftentimes at the time, I saw them as being recently immigrated. And yeah, that term, FOB, fresh off the boat, is a reflection of that, which meant that they usually maintain their ethnic identity from Asia. And that could be Korea, Japan, China, etc. But oftentimes what that meant was they spoke their own language, they kept up with their own culture, and there's nothing wrong with that. By the time I didn't feel like I resonated. I didn't know their music. I didn't know that background. They were following celebrities I didn't understand. So it was more for me about the claiming of one. And then later on, as I got older, I come back to reclaim the other. And that journey of rediscovery was a very conscious one.
Cool. I have similar journey, and I was born in Canada, but my parents were grocery store owners, and so we lived in the suburbs. I didn't live in the downtown Chinese core. So we learned English very quickly. My brother started public school. He didn't even speak a word of English. Like, to go play with the red fire truck, and he said, "Nay, what?" Which is, "What are you saying?" And so he ended up in the English language class for, I bet, a month till he picked it up. And then he taught me, and then he taught my younger brother. So by the time my younger brother went to school, he didn't even know a word of Chinese. Like, this is because siblings talk to each other, right? And so we just naturally spoke English to each other. And I could understand more than I spoke.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to get kind of teased by my aunts and uncles that I wasn't speaking Chinese with the right vocabulary or accent. And so you stop.
Yeah.
But in my teens, I thought, I still understand stuff, and I will regret it if I don't try to speak. So I remember by that point, the Hong Kong wave was coming to Toronto. And somebody said, "Oh, so-and-so's from Hong Kong. She wants to, get to know you." And she'd say, "I want to speak will you teach me English?" I said, "I will speak to you in Chinese or Cantonese, and you can correct me, and then you can speak English and I'll correct you." So we were helping each other get comfortable again. And it's, I think, a proud moment for me to recognize that I needed this and to fight back for this. It's not fluent, but it can pass. If people don't know I don't speak it, I can carry on a conversation for at least 10 minutes before they say, "What?" So I too kind of regain my roots and find a very comfort level in being both Canadian from Western practices and Chinese, and embrace those. And it's much easier today because we're very global. As a world, we're very global, and people understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the connection to our cultural values, I think it's such an important process of discovering. And I think I always say this, is that at the end of the day, what is most useful about those of us who are growing up in this kind of culture, and that we are third culture population, is that we get to choose. We get to choose which values resonates with us. Is it more individualistic Western values? Is it more collectivist, Asian values? Just throw out some generalizations, but we get to choose what is important to us.
And this is so applicable for any ethnicity or culture right now. People, it is much more, it's easier now to embrace who you want to be than it was, 20 years ago or more, because
absolutely.
the need to fit in was so big that you did try to fit into the culture of the country that you lived in.
Hmm.
Really, really.
For
But
safety and protection.
yep, yeah, and for a sense of belonging. Like
Yeah,
nobody
absolutely.
nobody wants to be an outsider in any kind of
Hmm.
community and stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It could be so isolating.
We're airing this during the Asian Heritage Month in Canada, or API in the United States. So thank you for spending some time for us having that dialogue about our Chinese heritage and how we've learned to embrace who we are as people.
Mm.
I want to stop here now and talk a little bit about um, your career. What was a defining moment for you that shaped how you became big Asian energy guy?
Sure. Uh, so a few years ago, yeah, because that was a pretty big change. I think where it was a my own personal journey of reclamation, of my own stepping into the thing. Because really at the core of this, my journey, the second part of my journey really started when I realized, hey, like this was something that was important to me. My cultural values, my cultural background, something important to me. And going through that rediscovery and then suddenly going, why do I feel this odd sense of trying to hide this background, trying to hide who I am? And at the time, I was reading these great books on personal development and personal work, and I traveling around the world. But the core part of it was this moment of awakening when I realized I could have both. I could absolutely maintain and love every part of who I was, and also fully embrace who I've come to be. And I think this is the core part of the message: is seeing and choosing what it is that we want to represent in our own values.
Yeah, we've touched on your big Asian energy. We talked about ACE and your values, and they're very similar to the ones I use. My podcast is named Rev Up Your Potential, and it
Yeah.
really is about finding who you are and
Hmm.
treating yourself and others with the same kind of values. Mine is treat people with respect, look at them as
Hmm.
equals,
Hmm.
value who they are. And then the key differentiators, looking at the uniqueness of yourself and others and tapping into that potential. And that's essentially what you've done too. You've framed it in a different way. You've used ACE, but at the core
Hmm.
of it, both of us are saying discover who you are, be confident in who you are, and embrace
Hmm.
who you are. Because when you do that, you're more confident and you're more authentic. You just need to be so confident and embrace who you are. That, I think, that's a key message that you and I have a kinship
100%.
towards.
Yeah, 100%. I'm a really big, from my own journey. I growing up as a kid of a tiger mom, so to speak, a refined tiger
Is she
mom.
okay hearing this?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we've had several conversations about this. She's awesome. And she kind of like, I'm not an Asian parent, and I grew up in North America. I'm like, yeah, but the culture was there. How many tutors did I have? And but I joke about that now, but the truth is that there is that culture of I would say overachievement, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah.
that are that the achievements that you have define everything about you. So I think that a lot of people I work with, they feel like I felt this sense of I'm never sure if I'm enough. There's a strong imposter syndrome. There's a strong of self-sacrifice. There's a strong need for I have to put everyone else around me, because if I don't put everyone else first, then who's going to do it? And that need of self diminishment can be so difficult, and it causes things like burnout. It causes things like imposter syndrome. It causes us to be afraid to step up and really let our potential be seen. As you say, rev up your potential, right? To let our potential be seen is first allowing ourselves to see our own potential.
So
And
how
so
do
for
you help people, or what tips or suggestions do you have to help people feel more, y- y- you know, that it's okay to be more I don't know if you use the word self-indulgent. I said the other day, I said, it's okay for me to not feel guilty about it. She's that's that's not the way you should be thinking, Hilda. There's no guilt You
Nope.
deserve to be thinking about yourself and doing things for yourself. Stop using that word guilty and going, why am I using that word guilty? You're right. You're absolutely right. But it's there. It's there.
It's there. It's there. And it comes from such a deeply ingrained place of safety. And what I mean by that is that we were taught at some point when we were growing up, most likely, right, that to give ourselves attention is to be selfish, and to be selfish is to be rejected. So if I please everyone else around me, if I keep giving and giving and giving and giving and giving, then eventually people will accept me and give something back to me. And they will see me, accept me, love me. So the switch really comes from three levels, right? We use the term self-love a lot in in this kind of industry, but the truth is self-love is not easily acquired, and that just gives us more pressure. So I usually start with empathy. This is why it is that we say ACE, assertiveness, competence, empathy. We start with empathy because we're so used to starting with competence first.
Mm-hmm.
So start with empathy for ourselves and say, can I be a friend? Can I just by, instead of saying I love myself or even I like myself in that regard, can I just accept? Can I accept that I'm going to be perfectly imperfect and have empathy and hold space for that? And then when we start from there and give ourselves the same empathy that we give other people, it sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? Because empathy is how feeling somebody else's feelings, but well, how can you feel your own? Well, empathy is communicating self-compassion and saying, where I'm at right now, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm supposed to be.
So
And from here,
where does this come from in you? I know in your preparation information, you talked about some, what I'll say is like horrific experiences, reading words like terrorists and
oh boy,
Paul and then a year of radical honesty. Can you tell me where big energy ACE
where does
comes
all
from?
come from?
Yeah,
A
where's
lot, yeah. It came from a lot of self-experimentation. I don't know where I got this idea from, but at some point in my early 20s, I just decided I was going to let myself be a human guinea pig. And I just loved the idea of, I wanted to try everything. And so anytime I read a book about a concept, I would go, let me try to do this for a month and see how it feels. So one of the things that I did was I did this concept called radical honesty for a month, which is you had to tell the truth and only the truth, and you can't tell a lie, not even a small lie, not even a lie of omission or a white lie. You have to only speak the truth. And it and it started with a month and it ended up being a year, and I completely changed everything and how I view the world. And so I did a lot of these exercises to find what actually worked. I loved, maybe it's growing up with a mom who wrote personal development books and was an expert in that field, but I loved learning more about different backgrounds. And at the core of it, I started realizing if you read enough personal development books, they really are all about the same thing. There is no difference. And when you start to realize what really genuinely is the secret that moves the needle, the core secret to happiness, Hilda, that I discovered is kindness. And I was in Nepal. Yeah, it's kindness. It absolutely is. I'm happy to quote endless studies, and I'm always shocked that we already know the secret to happiness, to living a better life, to being with better people, to have everything we want, and yet we keep ignoring it. They found the studies that show that seniors who participate in philanthropy live 10 years longer on average than seniors who don't. They found that people who do one act of random act of kindness a day for 3 days to 4 days are on average, I can't remember the exact study off the top of my head, but just exponentially happier in everything else that they do.
It feels so good when you do something for somebody. And sometimes you don't even have to know what the outcome is. You just know that you've done something to touch somebody's life.
Yes. And the secret is doing it selfishly.
Selfishly?
Yes. I know. I always get that response.
You mean you're doing it because you want to feel good? Your endorphins get rolling?
Exactly. You do it, and out of the place that I expect nothing back. I only do kind things when I want nothing back. And if I could do it in secret, great, because I just go, I do it for myself. And we're talking about stories before, and I'll share where this all came from. So I was in Nepal, and just traveling through Nepal, and I had gotten lost after doing this little trekking journey, and I was kind of stranded in the middle of the road, and I was like, okay, I have no phone, there's no reception anywhere, and I needed to get back home to my hotel. And at the time, a little truck kind of pulled up, and it was a local Nepalese man with his family, and he says, and we don't really understand each other because I can't speak the language, but I show him the name of the hotel, and he understands, and I hop on, and I start talking to his wife, who did speak a bit of English, and halfway through I realized that they were actually going the opposite direction when they first saw me, and they were driving over an hour to get me back to my hotel. And this is the key, Hilda. I'll share something. At the time, there was a fuel outage. There was a gasoline outage in Nepal. So people were lining up 3-4 hours a day to get fuel, and there was a ration. So for him to bring me back was an immense sacrifice on his family.
For sure.
And I couldn't handle it. I was just like, especially let me pay you. Like, let me pay you for the at least the gas. Let me take you out for dinner. Like, let me give you. I'm like searching through my bag. I'm trying to think what else I could give him, and they refused to accept any of it.
Wow. And
finally, he dropped me off, and I said, "Please, like, I just can't take this." And he spoke in what English he could, was along the lines of, "This is for me, not for you."
Wow.
And that changed my entire world. And after I came back from that trip was when I started doing the research, and I realized, oh my gosh, like, this is the secret of happiness, was when we do things for other people without expectation, we become more connected to ourselves. So the practice I teach is empathy, one act of kindness for somebody else, and one act of kindness for yourself.
What a powerful, powerful takeaway. I'm going to put that in my little pocket here and hold on to that. That is amazing. You and I could share stories all day and talk all day, but I'm appreciative of the time that you've taken, and I'm sure our listeners are saying, "You should have him back, Hilda. You should have him back. He's great. This is such great information."
Love to. Yep.
Tell us what's happening next for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm currently writing a book. I'm with a publisher over at Tiny Rep, which is Penguin Random House. They have an imprint there about big Asian energy, where we talk about all these things, as well as the various techniques of how do we communicate more assertively, competently, and all that. I'm a keynote speaker, so I'm happy to share more about that. If you want to learn more about any of this, go check out my website, which is bigasianenergy.co. Or you can find me on my social media. My Instagram is at John Wang Official, JohnWangOfficial.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, John, for coming on my show during Asian History Month or Heritage Month, and for us to have this little dialogue about our perspectives, our experiences growing up in North America. Canada specifically, because you're from Vancouver, where my family my family origins are, and me based in Toronto. But the parallels between the United States and Canada are very, very similar in terms of how the Asians' history evolved. So thank you very much for being a guest today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And to those of you who have listened or watched Rev Up Your Potential, I encourage you to give it a thumbs up, or give it 2 thumbs up, because I think, John's been an amazing guest and given us so much to think about. Whether you're Asian or of a different ethnicity, your experiences may resonate. Our experiences that we shared may resonate with you. So give it a thumbs up and subscribe. There's such interesting people that are part of this podcast, and we all learn when we share stories together. So thank you, everybody. And thank you again, John, for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Rev Up Your Potential with Hilda Gann. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our podcast on YouTube and Spotify to stay up to date on our latest episodes. For HR tips, news, and strategies, or if you're interested in being a guest on our podcast, visit our website at peoplebrightconsulting.com.